Nationwide November 2019 protests. On Friday, November 15, 2019, the Iranian regime declared a sudden hike in gas prices. On the same night, Iranians frustrated from economic constraints poured into the streets in different cities to voice their outrage at the government's policies. What began as social protests turned into a nationwide rally against the ruling theocracy that continued for a week. These protests shook the very pillars of the mullah's regime to their core. The popular uprising quickly spread to 160 cities across the country. Demands for a decrease in gasoline prices turned into slogans calling for regime change. The regime's forces responded to the peaceful demonstrations by attacking the people and breaking their vehicle windows.
25 آبان مردم به خاطر گرونی بلند شدن اعتراض مسلحانه تمیز کردن. یه دونه شیشه ماشین یا پنجره رو نشکستن. با کتک جواب دادن.
As an individual on the ground, I believe only God saved us, said Basij Commander Brigadier General Salar Abnoush, according to the semi-official ISNA news agency. In 5 provinces, we were engaged in far more intense crises, said Regime Interior Minister Abdulreza Rahmani Fazli on November 26, 2019.
اول محدود سازی شد ولی بعد که جلو رفتیم خیلی دامن این قضیه گسترده پیدا کرد به استان‌های دیگر. حالا در اینجا تصمیم گرفتن که این مسدود سازی بشه.
All in all, more than 1,890 regime-associated sites were attacked by protesters across Iran. On Sunday, November 17th, Khamenei associated this uprising to the Iranian opposition People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, PMOI, and ordered an all-out crackdown. As a result, they killed at least 1,500 people with direct fire. One example of the regime's crimes is seen in this video of shooting a protester at point-blank range. In some cities, such as Mojahedin in southwest Iran, the regime's security forces used armored vehicles, helicopters, and large-caliber machine guns against the protesters. The scope of the regime's crackdown in November 2019 was, without a doubt, unprecedented in the regime's 4-decade history. The main difference between the uprising and those of previous years was the organized nature of the events. Regime officials especially raised this issue in their remarks, referring to the PMOI resistance units inside Iran as the leading force behind the country's uprising.
همین قبل از این قضایای چند روز قبل از قضایای آبان ماه، این قضایای مربوط به بنزین و این حرفا، در یک کشور اروپایی، یک کشور کوچک اما شریر، واقعا خبیث در اروپا، یه عنصر آمریکایی با یه تعداد ایرانی مزدور وطن فروش جمع شدن دور هم علیه جمهوری اسلامی، بنا کردن برنامه ریزی کردن و نقشه درست کردن. نقشه هم همون چیزی بود که ما چند روز بعدش در قضایای بنزین دیدیم.
If the word on the ground during the December 2017, January 2018 uprising was the end of the reformist principlist scenario within the regime, in November 2019, the people entered the path of an uprising to realize their democratic alternative as the only solution forward. The resistance unit's strategy in cities, towns, and neighborhoods has found its ground.
The land of human rights. This is Iran, where the first Bill of Rights was written, one of the world's oldest civilizations. This is Iran, a land taken over by the mullahs, where protesters are responded to with bullets, where political prisoners face torture and massacre, where women's rights are systematically violated. A land with the greatest number of executions per capita. The only place in the world where children are executed. This is Iran, the land of human rights violations. Iran's regime has been condemned at the United Nations 66 times for human rights abuses over the past 40 years. Iran's regime has executed 120,000 members of the Iranian opposition. In the summer of 1988 alone, it massacred 30,000 political prisoners, mainly members of the NEK, and secretly buried them in mass graves. That massacre set the precedent in the mullah's approach for eliminating opponents. In the November 2019 uprising, the authorities murdered 1,500 protesters on the street and arbitrarily arrested a further 12,000, including at least 1,021 children, many of whom have now vanished. The regime continues to sentence protesters to death to spread fear in society. Protester Mustafa Salehi was arrested in 2018 and executed in August 2020. The regime even seized his home to send protesters a message that even their families would not be spared. In September 2020, the regime executed Iran's wrestling champion Navid Afkari for taking part in the 2018 protests, sending shockwaves around the world. The regime also continues to execute minors. The UN Special Rapporteur said in July 2020 that since 2013, at least 33 child offenders have been executed, with another 90 on death row. In Iran under the mullah's rule, sentences of amputation of hands and feet, eye gouging, and stoning to death are the law of the land. In Iran under the mullah's rule, lawyers are sent to prison for defending dissidents, while the perpetrators of the massacre of political prisoners hold senior judicial positions, including the judiciary chief. In Iran under the mullah's rule, the rights of ethnic and religious minorities are trampled on every day. This is Iran. In Iran under the mullah's rule, women are denied fundamental rights. They don't have the right to choose their clothing freely or to reach high positions of power. The mullahs are dependent on human rights abuses to continue their rule. The international community's inaction and the mullahs' impunity over human rights abuses have emboldened them in committing crimes against humanity. It's time to end the impunity for Khamenei, Rouhani, and other regime officials in committing countless crimes. The UN Security Council must recognize the regime's crimes, such as the 1988 massacre and the 2019 slaughter of protesters, as crimes against humanity and bring Iran's rulers to justice. This is Iran. With the mullah's regime's downfall, Iran will become a bastion of human rights.